grew up a big sports fan. Certainly know that about you from your podcast and listening to sports talk radio. When do you remember kind of thinking, hey, I want a career in this world?
I mean, when I was little, basically, I remember being a Yankee fan in the early '80s, and at first I wanted to be Phil Rizzuto. I wanted to call Yankee games, and then got to college, did the school newspaper thing, covering the football team, the baseball team, did the college radio station thing. So it was always sort of a combination of sports and journalism. And when I was in college, that's when this thing called the internet sort of came about. And I'll never forget it as long as I live. A good friend of mine, very close friend, worked at the newspaper at that time. It was before I had joined. And he said, "Oh, you got to come here. You got to see this." And he goes to his computer and he tries to, load up ESPN.com. And it took 10 minutes on a dial up to load up. And I'm like, who the hell would ever use this? I would never. I'm like, this is the stupidest thing. This isn't going to, and now here we are. I've made a living on the internet for 25 years. So the sort of the birth of the internet, I feel like I got very lucky with that timing wise, because I've been at SI working for SI.com, the digital side, since 2000, basically.
Before you got to SI, you told me a couple of some of the jobs that you had. The one that I wanted to ask you about was SportsPhone. For the listeners who aren't familiar with that, tell them what it is, how you got that job, and kind of what you did.
So let me first be honest about something. There were two companies. One was ScorePhone and one was SportsPhone.
Right.
And I honestly don't remember which one I worked for. It was that long ago, and the memory goes. Before there was the internet, it was really for degenerate gamblers. I guess the typical sports fan would use it every now and then, but it was an 800 number or a 900 number that a sports fan could call to get all of the scores for that night. Again, keep in mind, this is before the internet. I mean, it might have even been before the scroll on ESPN. I'm not even 100% sure. But usually at that time, this was in the 90s, you got your scores from the game you watched. They would do here's this out of town scoreboard. But there were this was in New York. You called a number. So the way the job worked was we had the AP wire there that had the live scores. Every 10 minutes, I'd go into this little closet and record the scores. I would just say, Jimmy Traina for ScorePhone. Here's what we got. Mets 4, Orioles 2, bottom of the 6th, Mariners 3, Twins 1, top of the 4th. It's the top of the 6th in Cleveland. It's and that was that job.
So people would call that number and they would get your recording depending on when they called, and they'd hear that.
Right, and they'd get the latest score. And like I said, it was mainly for degenerate gamblers.
Well, I'm old enough to remember, Jimmy, that for a time, the bottom line was only on ESPN2, if I recall.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there and you just would wait and you'd wait. It was like the old TV guide channels where if you turned on the TV guide channel and you missed your thing, you have to wait till it got back to the beginning. I know people in Chicago, SportsPhone was the big one in Chicago that people used to call. Okay, so you have a couple little jobs after college and ultimately SI. How did you get the job at SI?
Basically, it was through someone. So before SI, I worked at the Associated Press. Became friends with someone at the Associated Press. He left the Associated Press to go work at SI. A few months after he leaves, he says to me, "Oh, there's an opening at SI." Applied. Got the job. I mean, it was the lowest level job. It was an editorial assistant. My first job there was basically typing stories into the magazine stories into the computer system and, ordering pens. So, a lot of times, I'm sure you get this. We, both of us in sports media, you get people, young people especially, who ask, how do I get into it? How do I get into it? And I always tell them, people don't want to say this because they want to give you the impression that what will get you in the door. Who is just as important, if not more important, you could say sadly or not sadly, but that's the reality of it. So, like I said, made a friend at AP. He gets the job at SI, tells me there's another opening. I go get it, and that's how it worked out. So very
Did
lucky,
were
very
you
lucky.
somebody that read SI a lot? Like, was that kind of was that a once you got past the Phil Rizzuto, was that kind of a dream place to be at SI?
It, I have to say, I didn't have a dream place. I always wanted to do games. That's really what I wanted to do, and I didn't really have a plan. It was all haphazard. Obviously, yes, I read SI. I knew what SI was, so being there was this huge deal. Um, and I would have been happy at the Daily News or the Post because I read those. I read those newspapers every single day. I read USA Today every single day, even in New York. So it was always about getting in some form of media more than one specific destination. Because at that point, you're in college, you want a job, you want to make a living. So it was, like I said, incredibly lucky, huge, enormous bonus to be at a place such as SI. But I can't say that was like the number one goal. It was just get in sports somehow, some way. That's why I did SportsPhone and the AP, because at the AP, my job there was writing game previews.
Hmm.
So, it's another thing for youngsters. Like, do whatever you can, do as many jobs as you can, because then you do make the connections. So, like I said, with ScorePhone, writing game previews for Associated Press, then going on SI, it was just the goal was to like somehow be in sports.
As you went through some of those jobs and like when you first get to SI, your editorial assistant, did you ever reach a point where you're like, I can't do this anymore. This is not worth what I want to be, or were you so into it and you understood that this is just kind of what it takes?
Yeah, that I never ever had that feeling. I, I, I guess you hear these stories about today's youth, and they want everything right away. When I got a job at SI as an editorial assistant, I knew it was. I didn't even know it was. My whole mindset was, work your way up, and that's what happened. Especially at a place like that, you're not going to come in and you know get up here. You've got to work. So I never I can't. The only time early on, I remember early on they had me doing a couple of like editing a couple of sports that I just was not into. I think like NASCAR or something. And I remember that being a time where I was like, oh God, do I really want to do this? But luckily, it worked out where I was able to carve out some other things for myself. And I never really had like a serious, oh, I don't want to do this anymore moment.
This
Can't say
isn't
that I have.
this is an origin stories podcast, so I want to also hear the origin stories of what was Hot Clicks. What was kind of your? I feel like that kind of was like the first thing that really you were able to kind of put your stamp on and get out there.
Yeah.
How were you able to start doing those stories?
That's really what saved me because what had happened was I was mainly an editor and a producer. I wasn't really doing much writing. I would edit other people's columns, produce, for the web and that kind of stuff. And then what had happened was SI management wanted a daily appointment viewing column. They wanted like this. The idea was a column, posted at sort of lunchtime. Again, everyone listening has to understand this was before social media. This was a time when people went to websites to get their information. That's what everyone did. You had your bookmarks and you went through your bookmarks and you went to all these sites. So the goal was to like have a column that people would go to every day to check out. And I had proposed this idea of mixing sports and pop culture, covering the lighter side, not the X's and O's of sports, and mixing in fun stuff, light stuff. It was really, for SI, it was a little shocking because SI is thought of as storytelling and journalism. This was the complete opposite. And I think just out of desperation, they gave me the okay on it. And I got very lucky. I mean, I remember when I pitched the idea, my boss said, who's going to write it? And I was like, well, I am. Thank God. And I got very, very, very lucky again in that it was successful pretty much right away. So once it got successful right away, they sort of let me do what I wanted, and I was able to really make it what I wanted and create this community. And it was so fun. I miss it every day because it was a different time. Couldn't do it today at all. And I got and then eventually, I think about after a year, they came to me and they wanted two editions a day. They wanted AM hot clicks and PM hot clicks. And at that time, I was still doing some producing because I would do hot clicks early in the morning, and then I would spend the afternoon producing and editing some columns. So I said to them about a year into it, after a year, I said, okay, I'll do two a day, but I don't want to do anything else. And they said yes. And then it really became this really, really big thing for a little while there, which was unbelievably fun.
Do you remember what year it was that you started doing the hot clicks?
I think I started in 2007.
Okay. Well,
So I've been at SI for 7 years.
I did find the first Jimmy Traina newspapers.com reference is 2005.
Okay.
And I'll read this to you. This is from the Miami Herald. I believe it was Greg Coate.
Wow.
He was talking about, it's an article about the 72 Dolphins popping the champagne.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And he says, Jim Rome went on a handful of the old perfectos gather annually to toast 17-0 when the last unbeaten team finally and inevitably falls. It's an endearing little tradition, but not to everybody. Jim Rome went on ESPN the other day and called it classless. On SI.com this week, somebody named Jimmy Traina writes the tradition is embarrassing and pathetic, his words, and that it means old Dolphins are, quote, jealous, selfish, bitter, and childish. Which, I got to say, Jimmy, as a
Wow.
big fan of your podcast, 20 years
Yeah.
later, I could picture you saying that exact thing about that
So
exact
can I.
topic. Do you
So
remember
let's
that at
see.
all?
I, so I'm gonna guess. I can't say I remember it. I remember there was a period of time at SIU. It must have been before Hot Clicks where I don't remember the specifics, but every day a different person was assigned to do like a take, and there were also these things called like throwdowns where I think you argued against someone else. I don't know if I did that. I think I just there was something there was like a daily thing where someone would give a take. So that must have been I'm pretty sure I think that's what that was because I also had done one saying that I don't understand why the Star Spangled Banner is played before every sporting event, and that caused a whole big. And I didn't realize at the time that was like such a radical take. And all I wanted to know, and I still to this day, I still want to know, and no one can answer the question. Outside of tradition, what is the reason? No one can give me a reason. Like, why is it not played when I go to the movies? Why is it not played when I go to a Broadway show? Why is it not played at a restaurant before they give me my meal? Like, I don't understand why it's played during a Twins Royals game on July 5th. Like I don't, and no one can answer. They get mad that I say that, but they can't give me an answer outside of tradition. So I remember that one really causing a massive backlash. And at the time, though, again, social media wasn't around. So the way you got people telling you you're a schmuck back then was through emails. And I think I just like, it didn't faze me. Like, I don't know, it would be different today. The one about the Dolphins, I still think it's pathetic that they pop champagne every year. So I'm not surprised at all that was my take. I probably would have maybe toned it down a drop, but not too much. But you have to send me that because I would love to see that. That's fascinating.
I will.
I don't remember. I've always thought that it's ridiculous. I don't remember writing that specific column, but I it makes total sense that that would have been one of my takes back then.
Well, the other one I wanted to bring up was 2009,
Mm-hmm.
and this is actually from Newsday. Okay, I'm gonna like fail everybody on your part of New York because I can't.
Yep.
Is it Syosset?
Syosset.
Syosset. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is from Newsday, November
Right.
22nd, 2009. Syosset's own Jimmy Train of SI.com reported the Who will be the
Yeah.
halftime
Yeah.
act at the Super Bowl, extending the most shocking active streak in sports for a sixth consecutive year in the post-Janet Jackson era. Super Bowl halftime performance will be older than I am, for whoever wrote this story. Was that a big kind of break for you, like getting that story? Like, do you remember that being like a big moment? Because there were a couple newspaper.com clips that kind of cited you for that.
That was a huge moment for me, and I'll tell you the full story here.
Yeah.
The reason so here's how I got that scoop. The the Major League Baseball All-Star game was in New York that year. And for some reason, John Bon Jovi and Bon Jovi were part of the promotion of it. They had done a concert, I think, like in the park like they were part of the promotional vehicle of the All Star Game and Home Run Derby being in New York. And through that, I got to interview John Bon Jovi. We did it at Giant Stadium. Oh, and they were announcing it was tied into, I don't know, it was tied in with Bon Jovi was doing the first 10 concerts ever at the new MetLife Stadium, the dump they have now in Jersey after the old Giant Stadium. So it was somehow like they were announcing that they were part of the All Star game in New York. So my memory's hazy, but that's what it was. So I got in, so I was able to interview John Bon Jovi in person, and I had asked him about, you know, have you ever been offered the Super Bowl? Do you want to play the Super Bowl? And he was like, I remember he was legitimately bummed that they never asked Bon Jovi to do it, and he said that they really wanted to do it that year, but the NFL got the Who to do it. So that's how I got. And I remember when I wrote it in Hot Clicks, I was still nervous because but I didn't say John Bon Jovi told me. I just said this is what I found out. And I remember when they announced it. I think it was on things. They used to announce the halftime show during the Thanksgiving games, if I'm not mistaken. I remember I think they announced it on the Thanksgiving game that year. And my boss texted me or I texted him. I was like, whew, thank God that was right. And yeah, so I do remember too, because I was not, the thing about Hotflix, like, again, I wasn't a journalist. I wasn't a reporter. I broke things once in a while. And I remember when I broke that, I guess because the Super Bowl halftime's a big deal. I remember more than one article with like, who's this guy or who's breaking this or who would listen to this guy. But I was right. So that's all that
Well,
matters.
you might have already answered it with the stories you
Yeah.
told, but I do ask everybody in this podcast for their kind of welcome to the big leagues moment. If you had one that you haven't discussed, but just like when you kind of knew, oh wow, people read this, people are know who I am. Again, those are a couple of good examples, but do you have others that stand out?
Yeah. I mean, listen, it's kind of crazy because I still to this day, I still don't think people read and listen to things. So it's bizarre. I guess for me, very early on in the Hot Clicks days, it must have been '09. I interviewed Derek Jeter in person. And I was a massive Yankee fan, massive Jeter fan. And, I look back now and I'm like, God, I was so like unprofessional. I didn't do it. There's all these rules about journalism and interviews, but I was a fan. And that was sort of, I think, the appeal of Hot Clicks was we sort of pegged it as the voice of the fan. That's what the column was. So I remember I interviewed Jeter, and I mean, I did things then I would never do now. I mean, he was dating Minka Kelly at the time, but Jeter would never talk about that stuff. And I remember asking, because I found the interview a couple of years ago, and I remember asking him, "Do you watch Friday Night Lights?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Oh, who's your favorite character?" And he was like, "You're good, you're good." Um, and I remember, I guess the interview got picked up in New York locally by a couple of the papers or beat writers. And one of the beat writers reached out to me and said something like, when they went to Jeter to follow up with questions off of my interview with him, Jeter said to the writer, "That guy knew me better than I know me." So I was like, oh, that's a good compliment. So that was like my first big in-person interview. So that's like the first thing I sort of remember in terms of that. The other thing too is we had access to the traffic numbers at SI.com. So I saw what the traffic was for HotClicks, and I saw how it was going up, up, and up, and it was reaching these crazy numbers. I mean, many days, the most read thing on the site. So that was my biggest, like, oh, look at this. Like, no, it's not Peter King who's number one today. It's me. Like that. that was more than that. That was the moment I knew, though, that I had hit on something that people were into.
I should have done this earlier, but for our listeners who didn't read Hot Clicks, what
Yeah.
maybe give us like an example of like what a random day of Hot Clicks would include.
It's not completely, well, it's a little different, I guess. It was mainly about sports and pop culture. So, for instance, like today, we're taping this on Thursday. The news, if you follow any of the tabloid stuff, is that Tom Brady is maybe dating Sofia Vergara. That would have been like prime meat in the Hot Clicks days. Because again, you have to remember social media wasn't around. And I got a lot of the content I got was from emailers, from readers. I would get 1 to 200 emails every day of people submitting. It was people who had websites and blogs submitting stuff, but it would be fans who said, "Oh, I saw this," or "I saw this," and it was the whole day was like going through emails because again, no social media. So, who dated who was a big thing, or just fun. Media was always a part of it. Maybe not in a serious manner, as serious as I do now, but Hard Knocks was a huge thing. I remember when I would lead a column about wrestling, and my boss was like, "I don't know if we should be doing this." I would do gambling talk, and it was, "I don't know if we should be doing this," and um, it was just sport. If there was any sort of sports reference on Seinfeld, or I would write about it. So it was the lighter side, the mix of sports and pop culture. Every day I featured a quote unquote lovely lady of the day, which is why I say I would never be able to get away with that now. And even back then, when there would be trepidation about it, the thing I had in my back pocket at all times was, well, we have swimsuit. What's the difference?
Right.
So and it also got to the point where, I mean, it's kind of crazy. I was getting every day tons of emails from women models who would say, "Oh, can I be the lovely lady?" They would, so that obviously helped. I'm not stupid to think that that was not a factor in sort of getting some page views. But back then, I mean, it was really the wild, wild west on the internet. So, yeah, it was, all YouTube, tons of YouTube videos because Twitter wasn't around. Um, and yeah, it was, my goal for it was to be something fun that people could spend 10 minutes a day reading and just laugh and have a good time. And, back then, lists and rankings, oh my God, they were so, like, we don't do it as much now because it's just so tired. I mean, everyone still does, top 10 quarterbacks. But, like, back then we would do the, top 10 fast food restaurant. I mean, it was everything. So that was sort of the gist of it.
Yeah, and those were like the early days of BuzzFeed too. If you're talking about like the early aughts and that kind of,
Yeah, BuzzFeed came even a
listicles
little after.
after.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
It
what's
was
funny.
really it was Deadspin and the Big Lead were the two
Yeah.
big ones that were already established before I sort of came in.
It was funny because time for me, I'm going to insert myself here. I interned at SI in 2009, which is kind of the year we're talking about a lot. But I was
At
on
the magazine.
at the magazine, right.
Okay, so you were on a
So
totally different floor than the website.
completely different. I went to the
Right.
website floor like twice. I remember
Right.
walking past, I remember walking past a room where Andrew Perloff was playing foosball and thinking, wow, they have a lot of fun down here on the website floor.
I hated that foosball table. People played it too much. It was like all day long, and I was never in that.
I did one .com story during my internship. So I went down there a couple days to work on it with BJ Schechter and
Right.
Nina Mandel, who were the ones who were helping me on it. But I always like to, and I like when you have people on the podcast talk about the heyday of SI, that I do like to say I was still there when they used to do the town car if you were there late, too late at night.
Yes, and the food on
Sunday night
Sunday
food.
nights.
Yep.
Oh my God, they had, because I never worked Sunday nights for .com, but when I would come in Monday morning, that fridge would be filled with all the
Really.
leftovers. It was crazy.
I
Yeah,
also tell people my internship was in the spring of '09, and the magazine side, boy, when it was a golf tournament, everybody was like locked in on
yeah,
that floor,
yeah.
especially if Phil was in it. Was always a funny one, but I do remember that was right around Twitter. Like I can still picture sitting at my desk and John Heyman, who was at SI at the time, tweeting about Rich Harden. It's just such a, like a memory for me. And
Hmm.
it was like, oh, if you have this injury news, you have this new outlet that you could just post it before you have to write your article.
Right.
And it was just
It
a
changed
different era.
everything. Yeah,
It did.
changed everything.
When you look back to some of the early things you did at SI and then what you do now, I mean, there's a lot of similarities, obviously, but you've been there for so long. You've seen so much of this change in media. What kind of the important things that maybe you learned, or the skills that you honed, or some of the things that you did that like still matter today when you're writing or when you're doing your podcast?
You got to know what people are interested in. And I understand that sometimes you have to do things because you just, you have a good story. Maybe it doesn't appeal to people, but it's a good story. You want to tell the story. And in that case, maybe you don't worry about an audience. See, I've always approached it, again, coming always from digital, never coming from magazine, just always being on digital. You know, I'll get people saying like, "Oh, it's your job to do this," or "It's your job to do this," or "It's your job." And I look at it like my job. Well, my only job is to get people to read my column and listen to my podcast. So, like when people like you don't cover this, you're not doing your job. It's like okay, but that's my job is to get people to click on my column and listen to my podcast. And it's become harder and harder with social media, and everyone has a podcast, and everything now is about YouTube. So you've really got to keep up with what people are doing. I feel like I say it. I don't want to say it like I'm coming off as some sort of exit because I feel like I was late to the party on TikTok. I'm late to the party on YouTube. I'm late to the party on this. Twitter, I was there pretty fairly early on. Um, you, you got to figure out what people want, how they're consuming it. And I also think with sports, everyone just takes it way too seriously. Like everyone, like this, people get very angry when I say this, but at the end of the day, when the day is over and your head hits that pillow, it's sports is not important. Now it's important to us because this is how we make our living. But like your team losing, and I think people who don't go through any sort of like trauma or don't go through any sort of hardships or don't have kids, they don't like. If you have a kid who's struggling in school, you have a marriage maybe that's rocky, or you're moving, or you have a parent who's sick. Like you can't let your life get ruined because your baseball team lost a game in July. Like so, we all take it too seriously. I mean, I take it too seriously. I get pissed off at like that whole thing. Like, should I really care that the Dolphins are popping champagne? But it does bother me. So I do think we 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 should be focusing more on fun stuff when it comes to sports because it is just entertainment at the end of the day.
It's a game. It's a kid's game in a sense. I always
Yeah.
had to tell people like I take my job very seriously, but I always
Right.
try to remind myself that it's sports, which is
Yeah.
fun.
And I do think, it's interesting because I've been a bettor since college. And like I said, I would write about, oh, this team was -7 and late field goal and they didn't cover. And, I remember SI freaking. And now here we are with gambling being this just massive, massive thing. I actually think we almost underestimate how many people watch sports and pay attention to sports just for the fantasy and gambling aspect of it too.
Yeah.
It is it's pretty wild when like I'm the type of football fan where I want to watch every team every game. That's how I am. And I know people they just watch for their fantasy teams, and I'm blown away by that. Blown away by that. So like while that doesn't appeal to me, I know. For instance, Red Zone. I've had this thing going on at Red Zone. I have Scott Hansen on my podcast next week. I don't watch Red Zone. I don't. I'm not a fan because it's just not how I want to watch game. But I know that everybody loves the red zone. So you have to get into what people like. So I think that's a key here with what we do.
I haven't asked this yet on the podcast, but I'm curious your take. Do you think there's like what would be like the best generation to be in sports media? Like you came in at the start of the internet, which I think is pretty cool. I came in kind of at the start of, I would say, by guest start of Twitter, which
Yeah.
was cool for a moment, a longer moment, and then you can go back to people who I mean, we've heard so many stories where people talk about the heydays of Sports Illustrated, the heydays of newspapers. Those people probably say when the money was flowing. I think some people might say today when like anybody could be a content creator. So like, how would you look at that?
It's funny you say that because I was going to say I think I have two answers because I think the real answer is today is the best time because all you need basically is this, and you can be
Yeah.
in sports media. It's really crazy. Like you see people make careers just based on things they posted on TikTok, things they posted on YouTube. Um, it's easier to make connections because everyone's available on Twitter, so you could. So in terms of getting your foot in the door and doing something in sports media, this is the best time. For me personally, the best time was before Twitter, when the internet was sort of the wild, wild west. And you can make the argument that wasn't good, but that time to me in the early 2000s there when the internet was just starting before Twitter, because also I mean I don't want to get into a thing about I don't know what kind of role politics plays in the sports of it, but like politics was never part of sports in that day and age. I mean, now, oh, I don't like this athlete because he likes Trump, or this person's woke. I'm not gonna this athlete. So like that was never a thing. Like it was never ever a thing before Twitter. So for me, the that era of the early 2000s before Twitter was by far the most fun, the most and creative. I remember being blown away by the creativity I'd see on blogs
Yep.
and writers on blogs. Say what you want about Deadspin with some of the things they did, but like they broke the mold there, and you saw a lot of creativity. Now it's not creativity; it's let me say something crazy and get attention, and so that would be my answer to that.
It reminds me, and you probably did this for hot clicks at times. When I got my first job, I was at Pro Football Weekly, and one of the things I had to do was track the news. And I had Twitter was starting, but it still wasn't like the place. So I would literally have, but tabs had started on your web browser. So I would have
Right.
Pro Football Talk, NFL.com, ESPN.com, SI.com, and I would sit there and I'd reload
Yeah.
each page and then see like, oh, somebody got hurt. Oh, somebody got signed. Like that was how you found out the news in the days, as
Absolutely.
you said, kind of before Twitter really exploded. But it's a good point because I remember, I mean, I haven't had. I'd like to have somebody out from like the old days of Deadspin. I mean, that was you talk about like the writing they did, the stories they did. I mean, nobody was doing things like that. It was
And
it was
people,
a
I
fun
mean,
time.
that Manti Te'o story was
Yeah,
Deadspin,
yeah.
and
It's and yeah, but it's a good point because it's a different. You gave some great advice earlier about for people to break in, but it is yeah. You take your phone and you can do a lot of different things with your phone to create content.
yep,
I'll wrap here with this, Jimmy, because
yep,
we're about to get into football season. I did email you that I totally agree with you about July and August. Just brutal. Just get me to football season. And I'll be like in my busy time in training camp, but I'm still sitting there, be
yeah.
like, get me to
When do the Bears open camp?
Bears open camp on July 23rd. I think is their first
Oh, all right. So
practice.
you got
So
2 weeks. All right.
yeah, so we're
Um,
recording this 2 weeks before, so I got a little more time. But I was joking. The first week of camp is always exciting. The fans are all there. Everyone's so excited,
yeah,
and then you get to like the slog of like, okay, I've seen enough of these guys who probably aren't going to make the team. Let's just get to
yeah,
the real games.
yeah.
And now these teams, the joint practices become more interesting than the preseason games because like the Bears have two joint practices, and I think they're going to say that's our game, and then the preseason game will just be the backups.
Right, right.
It's a
That's what
different.
yeah. They got to do
S-
something about the preseason.
Looking ahead to the NFL season,
Mm.
in your beat, sports media, what are one or two like sports media storylines in football that you're kind of most interested to follow? Obviously, last year was Brady, which still might be
Right.
a big thing, but like, what are you most interested in watching this fall?
I think the biggest one will be JJ Watt becomes a game analyst for CBS, and not just any analyst. He's on the number 2 crew with Iron Eagles, so they get a playoff game. Iron is obviously tremendous, one of the best in the business. Uh, Iron many years worked with Charles Davis. He's going to college football. So you have JJ now as a full time analyst. So I'll be very, now. I'm intrigued by that because if you follow JJ Watt on Twitter, he's not shy about sharing opinions. He will often rip the refs, coaches. So I'm gonna be interested to see if he's toned down or if they let him fly. So that's a big one there because again, that's the number two crew for CBS, so they get good games. I think year two of Brady is still fascinating because year one was not great. Um, I didn't think it was terrible. I thought it was not great. The problem is when you make that money and you're number one, they want you at a certain level. He was not at that level. So I'm fascinated to see if he's any different. I felt like, I don't know this for a fact, this is just my own opinion, speculation. I felt like he was held back by maybe people at Fox. I feel like he was not letting it fly. I'll be curious to see if there's any differences there. Um, like you say, we're still 2 weeks out, like you said, from when the Bears open camp. So we haven't gotten, CBS and Fox have not released their full crew, so we don't know if there's any. The major change they announced was obviously JJ Watt. Um, so Watt, Brady year two, and like I said, we don't know what the Fox and CBS crews are, but all of the main crews, Alan Kirk on Thursday night on Amazon, Joe Buck, Troy Aikman remain the same. Mike Tirico, Chris Collinsworth remains the same. So I'm really curious about Watt and Brady in year two.
Yeah, it should. It's a fun. Listen, one of the fun things about what you get to do in covering sports media, which is like, is this sounds simple, but there's some things are the same, but there's always change, and there's always something to analyze and something.
Yes.
I mean, this is the NFL has just become. I mean, it is number one, and there's no college football is a far number two.
Absolutely.
And it's been good for all of
Absolutely.
us to follow this stuff. Jimmy Traina, you can go check out his podcast, SI Media with Jimmy Traina, and read his stuff at SI.com. I told Jimmy an email. I mentioned this in the intro. Your podcast helped inspire me to build this one because I think you do a phenomenal job with your interviews, and I love your segments with Sal. So I appreciate you hopping on this podcast and telling us your origin story.
Thank you. That's really nice of you to say. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thanks.